Scott Melbye, Executive Vice President, Uranium Energy, and he is joining us now. Scott, good to have you with us, man.
Yeah, good morning, John. It's great to be on your show this morning.
All right, Scott, the Executive VP of Uranium Energy. You know, I want to have you on today, Scott, because, of course, the only time we talk about the uranium situation is when it has to do with Hillary Clinton and the Russians buying up our 25% of our uranium output and everybody looking the other way, and then Bill Clinton getting a $50,000 8-minute speaking engagement from the bank that put the deal together, right, all that. But there's a bigger issue with uranium. And I want to frame this for people, Scott, may I?
Yes, go ahead.
Let me just frame it here. So I grew up in the 70s, and I remember when Jimmy Carter was president, we had gas lines, right? You'd have to wait on gas, Scott. You're probably not as old as me. You don't remember that. But we used to have to wait on lines for gas. And then there was a gas shortage because we had to import all of our energy, right? And the dream was, you know, one day we would be energy independent, and nobody ever saw that. That was like a pipe dream. And so then they would have odd and even days, right? You probably don't remember this either, where if it was an odd day, you could only get gas if your license plate ended in an odd number, and even days only if your plate ended in an even number. That is as true as I'm standing here. So, but now nobody really thinks about energy anymore because now we're a net energy exporter. So we were addicted to foreign oil imports that at one point accounted for 60% of our energy consumption. And remember, Scott, that was viewed as a national security issue. Remember that? When you talk about energy, it was like not only did you have an energy shortage, but it was national security. We had the energy reserves in case something happened, right? We had the big reserves in case of some kind of an attack or an emergency. But now we're a net energy exporter, so nobody really talks about it in those terms. But Scott, uranium is now the new energy for us. Same situation in the 2000s. Can you elaborate on this for us?
Sure, and you're absolutely right. And the story with America's oil and gas turnaround is really a testament to American ingenuity, hard work, and supportive policies. But we're facing a similar situation today where nuclear energy, and I think your listeners in Virginia know this very well, it's 20% of U.S. electricity supplies. It's much more so in Virginia. It's providing clean air, reliable electricity, and stable rates. But we're now at a point where over 98% of the uranium needed to fuel those nuclear power plants is coming from foreign sources. What's more alarming is 40% of those imports are coming from Russia and former Soviet countries like Kazakhstan. And we also know that the Chinese are kind of coming on their heels to penetrate our market with imports of their own. I also bring it back to your Virginia listeners, many of which have worked down in Newport News in the shipyards or were Navy veterans. We have 108 reactors on 82 aircraft carriers and submarines, which run 24/7 for years at a time without refueling on uranium. And in the instance of our military programs, by international treaty, 100% of that uranium must come from domestic uranium sources, so mines in the western United States. And we're getting to a point where the penetration of these state-owned companies in countries like Russia and Kazakhstan are just about edging out our domestic ability to produce uranium for our own needs.
So what's the long-term picture here, right? And so, I mean, we've got what could be a national security crisis with uranium, right? Could be.
Yep.
Heading in that direction. How do you change it?
Well, we're fortunate to have President Trump in office. He's already taken, in his first 2 years in office, has really rolled back regulatory overreach like the EPA that was trying to put our industry and many other industries like our own out of business for no benefit to public health and safety. We've seen a more manageable, sensible management of the DOE uranium inventory. So President Trump has been doing a lot of things, but the thing that will probably impact the most is the current investigation that's ongoing at the Department of Commerce, where there's the so-called Section 232 investigation into uranium imports. to determine whether there is a national security threat from those imports. Now, I know your listeners may be familiar with this from the steel and aluminum investigation, which resulted in tariffs on foreign aluminum and steel, and has really boosted our steel industries in the United States. Well, it's a much easier argument to be made of the national security threat with uranium when basically the backbone of our defense posture around the world with our nuclear navy, the supplies of fuel to that program are threatened. So we have a situation with the 232 investigation. It has been ongoing now for several months, but the report is due to hit President Trump's desk on April 14th, and then the president has 90 days to either accept the recommendation, accept those remedies proposed, or come up with his own. The industry has proposed a 25% quota that would require U.S. utilities to buy just a quarter of their needs from U.S. suppliers, which would stimulate increased uranium production back up to a level of about 12 to 15 million pounds a year. That's far cry from the 40 million pounds a year we produced in the United States in the 80s when we led global production, but it will certainly help reinvigorate our domestic industry, which will be good for energy security, but also national security.
We're with Scott Melbye, Executive Vice President of Uranium Energy. Scott, let me ask you this. So with this, let's call it a quota or let's call it a mandate, basically forcing, let's just call it what it is, and understand that you're talking to somebody that is not a free trader, and you're talking to somebody that believes in tariffs, and I'm a protectionist, okay? So that's where I come from. I'm not a free trader, and quite frankly, I never met a tariff I didn't like. So this is basically a mandate for U.S. companies to buy from U.S. uranium producers in order to stimulate the demand and spur our production of uranium so that for national security purposes, right? The backslide to this is that the free traders, the Koch brothers and others are going to go crazy and say, well, that's just adding the cost of production. They can buy it cheaper from these other countries. Why would you make them spend more money in an open marketplace in order to buy uranium from an American producer when they can get it cheaper overseas? Why not just put a tariff on the uranium that comes in from other countries? Why not just do that?
Well, again, I think the argument on free trade is an important one. I mean, a global robust trade, if it is truly indeed free trade, I think is a good thing. But in this case, we're talking about state-owned companies that, basically run by the Russian Rosatom, the company that owns Uranium One that we're familiar with from the Clinton scandals. They know good and well what they're doing, and pricing uranium below the global production cost. So even our reliable allies to the north, Canada, their mines are shutting down, and they're just as impacted as we are here. What's the good news is that America is blessed with abundant uranium resources, over 1 billion pounds in the ground that can be mined on an environmentally friendly basis and on an economic basis, which is most important. And let me address the consumer aspect, because you have a lot of listeners in the Virginia service territory of your utility Dominion generation. Mm-hmm. The beauty of uranium is the efficiency of that fuel. You get so much energy in such a small amount of uranium. It's the same reason the naval reactors run on uranium, is that the nuclear fuel is a very small component of the generating cost. In fact, uranium is only 5% of the cost of generation, and we're talking about a nominal increase on a quarter of that supply. So if you're a ratepayer in Virginia, you're not going to even see any measurable, maybe a penny increase in your rates as a result of this. But you're going to avoid the situation someday where if utilities are so reliant on Russia for 40% or 50% of our supplies, what happens when there's some military event in the Mediterranean or the Baltic, and either we cut off Russian supplies or they cut us off, which has happened twice in the last year. where the Russian Duma threatened to cut off supplies of nuclear fuel to the U.S., and we've had legislation proposed in the U.S. Congress to do the same for the Russians. I hate to think what the impact on the rates would be in that instance. So it's a very small price to pay to have greater both energy security, but also be able to fuel our naval reactors going forward.
We're with Scott Melbye. He's the Executive Vice President of Uranium Energy. Excuse me, Scott. Can you elaborate on the Uranium One deal that Hillary Clinton approved as Secretary of State? There's a lot of misinformation on that. What exactly did the U.S. do in that deal?
Yeah. Well, I would encourage, if your listeners haven't read the book that was written by Peter Schweitzer with contributions from Joe Becker at the New York Times, they very accurately laid out, not only in the uranium story, but the Clinton Foundation repeated this playbook over and over in many other industries around the world and amassed hundreds of millions of dollars in, call it bribes, and they're not donations to this is not a charitable foundation. If 5 or 10% of what's contributed actually goes to charity and the rest of the 80-90% goes to the Clinton family or funding dossiers or private aircraft or the things that the money has gone to. In the uranium instance, Uranium One and its founding company were the largest contributors to the Clinton Foundation over the years, which we know now the Clinton Foundation essentially dried up almost literally the day after Hillary lost the election. There was no reason to give money to that foundation with the power base gone. So they built the company by acquiring assets in Kazakhstan through a very unique kind of three-way deal with the president of Kazakhstan, Bill and Hillary Clinton, and an investor in Vancouver acquired those uranium assets. That was back in 2004, 2005. In 2010, Uranium One was expanding, and they acquired U.S. assets in the state of Wyoming and down in Texas. When the Russians wanted to take this company, take control, a 51% interest in that company, and eventually they took 100% control of that company, they needed CFIUS approval, which is a government, intergovernment approval that measures, okay, is this transaction in the nation's best interest? Are there national security impacts? Is there organized crime? Is there any sort of levels of corruption that would prevent us from allowing that purchase to go through? I remind you that at the time that was happening, there was an active FBI investigation into corruption and extortion underway. It resulted in prison terms for Russian national working in the United States. So there were a lot of red flags that would have said, hey, this is not in the nation's interest to basically give Vladimir Putin 20% of our productive capacity of uranium in the United States in the heart of the Powder River Basin of Wyoming to Russia. But Hillary Clinton, being the head of that CFIUS review, received millions of dollars of donations, which she failed to disclose when she ran for president. I'm sure it was just an honest oversight. But if you just follow the money in the Uranium One history, you'll see favors, government favors being doled out, and you've seen cash go to the Clinton foundations. It's, I think, more than coincidence that that's happened over and over again. It's really that story. Every time you hear it, it's a head scratcher, and I know you used the word coincidence. I mean, and remember James Carville getting on TV and said, "Oh, if you close down the Clinton Foundation, people will die." Remember that? Well, people aren't dying, and remember this: it's not pay to play. This is a global foundation for doing good around the world. And like you say, Scott Melbye, the day after she lost the race for president, the money dried up and it now went out of business. I mean, they just think we're so stupid. But look, I want to go back to your main point here in protecting our uranium mining companies because this is in our national security best interest. And so what you're looking to do, what your organization is looking to do, is get the president to mandate that companies that need uranium buy at least 25% of it from United States makers. Now, the
again, the flip side with that is if I'm a uranium maker or a miner, right, and I'm producing the uranium and I get a mandate, I can charge whatever I want. We can all just, there's 10 of us, we can all just raise rates because you have to buy it from us. That's why I think you're better off with a tariff, because then the tariff restricts the supply coming in from someone else, or it raises their price, puts you on an even playing field. But then all the mining companies would still be competing with each other. That's the difference. I mean, it's kind of the same concept, but
I mean, listen, President Trump has said himself he's a tariff guy. The industry proposed the quotas because we think it's more of a surgical approach. It has less disruption to the U.S. and global markets for uranium. And at the end of the day, the U.S. producers still have to compete for that business. So we'll be bidding competitively, and there will be competition for those supplies. What it will result in is something that, we're already beginning to advance some of our projects in South Texas. We just this week hired the drilling company to come out and kind of begin the preparations for our next well field where we're producing uranium from in the next year or two. And so it really does translate into jobs and more economic activity in a lot of places in the western United States where jobs in the uranium industry are very similar to those jobs in oil and gas. They're very high-paying jobs that really are a boost to those local economies. So we think the quota is the right way to go. The president is the ultimate decision on this. He may decide to go the tariff route, but at any rate, we do need to see our uranium industry producing less than 2% of our domestic needs. We need that much higher going forward.
Well, no doubt when the president sees the report, he's going to do something, knowing him as I do and we all do, because, look, I mean, he's seeing the same facts. You mentioned 20% of the U.S.'s entire electricity comes from nuclear energy. We had nuclear submarines, all these nuclear-powered reactors. You need uranium for that. And right now where, almost 50% of it is coming from either the Russian Federation or some country that is a satellite of theirs. And it for just from national security, it puts us at risk if anything happens. That they just cut that off or raise the price dramatically or do whatever the hell they want. Big problem.
Yeah, and they know what they're doing. I mean, President Trump was right to call out Angela Merkel and Germany at the NATO meetings for growing over-reliant on Russian gas. It would be a shame if we're doing the same thing when we have abundant domestic resources and uranium and all energy sources, frankly, at our disposal in the United States. It would be a shame to not be getting the full use of those resources. So we're hopeful, confident that the president will come down on the right side of this issue. He certainly has been doing all the right things for our industry to date and has really been a refreshing change from the Obama years where it seemed like our government was trying to put us out of business and try to, causing us to lay off people instead of hiring like we're doing this week down in South Texas.
The Obama way, right? Scott, Thanks for being with us, man. I really appreciate it. Scott Melbye, Executive Vice President of Uranium Energy. Scott, I really appreciated the time and great insight. Thank you so much.
Great.
We'll have
Thank
you back,
John.
Scott.
It was my pleasure.